Well, dozens of police in riot gear entered UCLA's campus this morning after pro-Palestinian protesters ignored warnings to disband. It comes as demonstrators have built and demonstrators encampments, dozens of campuses nationwide. These past few weeks are calling on universities to cut business ties with Israel over its war in Gaza. One UCLA senior said he needed 14 staples in his head after he was hit with a traffic cone and beaten with a wooden stick.
I thought the police would be our saving rescue. Instead, what ended up happening was we saw the police forming in a large group outside, seemingly watching the events unfold.
Meanwhile, at Columbia University, only imprints left of the encampment. That's what marks the epicenter of the student movement. Joining us now to talk about this and much more is Congresswoman Delia Ramirez of Illinois' 3rd District. Congresswoman, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Of course, happy to be on.
Yes, so we just heard from the president. He said there is no stance change. Stance change being, is there any stance change towards what the United States is saying and what they are doing about the situation right now there, the deteriorating situation in Gaza? He also says he has no plans to bring in the Guards members to crack down, if you will. No plans to do that on college campuses. And he said, you know, we are a country of freedom of speech, but it needs to be safe and it needs to be respectful. What are your thoughts as this call continues to go out, and we've seen it start at one campus, Columbia University in New York, spread nationwide? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on U.S. policies? What do you think needs to be changed?
Well, many questions. So I'm thinking about where do I start? Look, one of the things that we celebrate so much about in this country is our freedom of speech. Our young people in these schools are exercising that amendment that we treasure so much. They're discontent with where their schools are investing their money. They're not happy about us sending another $14 billion of unconditional aid to the Netanyahu administration. And for the last 7 months, they've been calling for a permanent ceasefire. And for them, being out here peacefully protesting, because that's what the majority of what you're seeing it has been, is their right, and we should be protecting it at all costs. It has been really unfortunate to see that there has been a threat to safety to people there, right, to protesters, and that for those, many of them Jewish students, many of them Palestinian students, and others who are there together saying, not one more dollar of our school tuition, not one more dollar from this government, we need a ceasefire, has been weaponized, even so here in Congress by our own speaker.
Noted there. There are some areas of contention there. I mean, tuition doesn't directly go, obviously, to funding a war, but they are talking about investments that the school make that would be pro-Israeli, though. But want to talk with you. We'll talk about more about free speech because you made an interesting vote on Tik Tok just recently. But let's go now to a remarkable thing that you did as a freshman. You actually authored and passed a bill that would basically get veterans their money back. Those that served our country, went to war, came back and got scammed and schooled by schools that were supposed to give them legitimate degrees. Of course, we've seen these fake degrees pop up from schools that profess doing one thing, they gave them nothing. Tell me about your bill and how you are going to now make these veterans whole again.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think to your point, Brad, thousands of veterans have been defrauded by these for-profit schools. You know the names, Phoenix universities, right? Some of those schools that you've seen, like DeVry University, they go under. All of a sudden, the student has lost. They're not getting their bachelor's degree, but they've lost their entire GI education benefits. The bill, negotiated and compromised in bipartisanship, will help restore for thousands of veterans their benefits so they can go back to school. And the second piece of it that's really important is putting the onus and the responsibility on these schools. The reality is that if you're a student through the Department of Education, you have borrower's defense. So if a school tries to defraud you or goes under, gets bankrupt, you still get your grants back. because veterans go under Department of Veteran Education, these schools were using predatory practices to take all the money without a responsibility of payback. They will now have to pay back. Thousands of students will be able to go back to school. In the words of my ranking member, this level of legislation, a freshman year in this particular Congress, seems impossible. And I'm really glad that we were able to make it happen. Going on to the Senate with a lot of commitment to be able to make sure that the president signs it and we celebrate it on Veterans Day.
Oh, congratulations. No question, a major feat for you. Let's talk about your vote against a ban on TikTok. So the vote was basically 360 said yes, ban TikTok, not ban it, but force its sale. That's not a ban yet. Force its sale. They want, the goal of it is for it to not be owned by a company with close ties to the Chinese government. You were one of 58 congressmen and congresswomen to vote against that initial bill. Why did you vote against it? What is the message you're trying to send?
Well, look, let me start, Brad, first by saying to you that unquestionably, there are security concerns that we should be addressing. And it's not just TikTok, right? I mean, it's the gamut of social media. You see this on Instagram, you see this on Facebook. The reality is that this bill, this ban on TikTok, it's not going to address any of the security issues. Frankly, even the way that it was rushed and the provisions that were put in, even the second time we voted, because this was the second vote on it, it was put in the sidecar legislation that threw in a bunch of other things in there, including a Marjorie Taylor Greene bill around not funding Ukraine. It was this ridiculous, what we call omnibus or minibus bill that had TikTok in there. What it's actually going to do is going to infringe more on freedom of speech. I mean, we know that people all over the world use TikTok to communicate, to be able to let people know what's happening. But the other part of it is the number, thousands of entrepreneurs who depend on TikTok here in the United States after the pandemic, that as a result of this ban, they may be losing their business. I mean, the reality is I don't think that people understand the level of impact it will have now that, in essence, right? Because it is privately owned, that it will end up getting banned here in the United States, removing freedom of speech and really attacking so many of our small businesses. Okay.
So you don't necessarily disagree with the fact that it should not be ideally connected to the Chinese government. You agree there's probably a better way to do this, is what you're thinking. This is not the way.
It is certainly not the way. We asked for more hearings. You got ACLU and so many organizations who are saying the dangerous precedent that you are setting in this moment. You are going to see the impact, especially if you have the Trumps of the world anywhere close to the White House.
Okay,
and this was a perfect example of that.
Okay, final word to you. We appreciate it. Appreciate you coming us on. Kudos on the bill. Thank you for talking about other hot button topics that we brought you on here and asked you. We appreciate that. Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, 3rd District, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.